Okay. Welcome to the Mark L. Tykocinski Endowed Lecture. I'm Bon Ku. I'll be moderating at this event. We have an exciting hour, so thank you for joining us. I am a physician and professor of emergency medicine at the Sidney Kimmel Medical College at Thomas Jefferson University, based here in Philadelphia. Thanks for joining us. So good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning from wherever you are at. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Mark Tykocinski. He serves as the Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Thomas Jefferson University and Dean of Sidney Kimmel Medical College. Mark is a pathologist by training and has made research contributions in the fields of molecular and cellular immunology. In his spare time, Mark was able to found an Israeli biotech company, and he holds a series of research patents. Throughout his career, Mark has blended the fields of science, medicine, and creativity. I'll hand it over to you, Mark.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, Bon. So I have to say, normally when I see endowed lectures and I see one with my name on it, I just sort of pinch myself to wonder if I'm still alive or if this is done in my memory. But I actually, the motivation behind this was Al Spivak, one of our really incredible alumni out in California, with longstanding connections to Stanford. Just an amazing human being. He was I hate to say on the side, he was a ceramicist and did other kinds of artistic work because it was such a passion of his. But what was really a passion of his was the idea that, training in medicine is one thing, but it's the cross-cutting ways of approaching it that's so important. And that really has been the inspiration for everything we're doing in terms of our Medicine Plus concept, in particular, the work that we've done around Medicine Plus design. And if you look at what Dr. Bon Ku has done and run with this, it's just incredible. And I know wherever Al Spivak is looking down at us, this is really, Bon is giving life to everything that's been done. I'm really thrilled, that we now have this annual lecture series. We have this amazing lecture today, and I'm just couldn't be more excited to be here to hear that. We do have the Alfred P. Spivak, MD scholarship recipients. That's and you can see what year of medical school they're in. Catherine Achuk, Jasmine Wang, Colin Yost, Molly Muir, Jasmine Fun, Mara Sakal, Emily Marshall, Rael Lail, and Miranda Sill. And if I've mispronounced any of the names, I hardly am the one that should do that kind of thing, given what my last name is. So I'm going to turn it right over back to Bon Ku, and I'm looking forward to the next hour. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Michelle Longmire. She is the CEO and founder of Medable. It's a company that uses a decentralized clinical trial platform that's actually designed to make therapies get to patients faster. Medable's valuation has skyrocketed to $2 billion. They have raised more than $300 million in venture capital this year. Fast Company has named Michelle as one of the 100 most creative people in business, and Inc. magazine recognized her as one of the top 100 female founders. She is very cool. I'm excited to learn about her unique and creative journey in blending science and technology. So please give a virtual applause to Dr. Michelle Longmire.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so great to be here, Dr. Ku. So let me pull up my slides here. All right. Cool. All right. First of all, congratulations to the scholarship recipients. It's really exciting to see, just how people are leveraging our incredible knowledge of medicine and using that to, shape the world in new ways. I'm really excited to talk with you today. And really the goal is thinking this through after being invited was really just to kind of share some pearls that I've learned throughout the years that I think could be, applied by others to a creative journey. So first of all, given that this is a talk in creativity and medicine, these will maybe fairly lightweight on the creative side with regard to the slide formatting, but let's hope that the overarching journey is more interesting. So, when I've thought a lot about this idea of kind of creativity, and I guess I've never considered myself, creative exactly. I think really, as an entrepreneur or an inventor or a scientist, creativity is something that you're not striving for, but differentiation of the pursuit is part of your life's blood. It's really the foundation of your success, and it's kind of the why of your existence. None of this really comes with at birth, but it's something we cultivate. And I love this quote, which I'll just read because I think it's an important message. And take this as gender neutral. This was written many years ago, but everyone holds his fortune in his own hands. Like a sculptor, the raw material he will fashion into a figure. It's the same, that type of artist activity was as with all others. We're born with the capability to do it, but the skill to mold the material into what you want must be learned and attentively cultivated. I think this message is very powerful. We often see people with extreme talent and believe that they're very different. And when you really study creativity and mastery, the application of creativity to groundbreaking ideas and groundbreaking innovation, there's actually a lot more to the story. It's generally that someone has become, obsessed and dedicated and committed to developing that mastery. It's less actually differentiated talent alone and more a dedication and perseverance that is a strong narrative to the outcome. So, as Dr. Koo shared, I've become an entrepreneur. I trained in dermatology at Stanford, and throughout that journey, really took a different path, a path that I never saw myself taking. But also along the way, as I think will become clear, I never really found the path before that really spoke to me. I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and I think this is an important part of the journey because this is a community that is at the cutting edge of innovation. And from a very young age, I learned an important pearl for living a creative life. And that was, to really listen to what calls you. My grandfather was one of the nuclear physicists who he actually defined electromagnetic pulse theory and developed the hydrogen bomb. My dad was obsessed from a young age with falconry and became a self-taught falconer and went on to become a geneticist who developed the first genetic test for actually sexing whooping cranes when whooping cranes were on the border of extinction. And so he applied his love of birds, which he had developed over years, to his profession as a geneticist, and actually was able to effectively breed endangered birds in captivity to bring many of them off the endangered species list. My third kind of mentor in learning to live creatively and tune into really listen to what's calling you in life was my mom. My mom was very passionate about radiochemistry and became one of the very first women to pursue plutonium chemistry at Los Alamos National Labs. And really through, these three mentors in my life, I began to understand the value of really listening to what calls you. At a young age, I guess, in thinking about what really was calling me, I had a love of understanding and defining and pushing my natural limitations or perceived barriers. And I also had a real deep kind of passion and obsession with human health and human disease. From a very young age, I actually suffered from childhood hypochondriasis and pretty much thought I had any illness that I had ever heard of. With that, though, came a deep fascination of science and a true love of medicine. I think, when you're 10 years old, there's so many things about medicine that remain unknown in general. And at 10 years old, the vast majority of those things are even greater and can be fairly overwhelming. So here I was, a lover of science, very passionate about human illness, fascinated, and almost in some ways kind of consumed. And, trying to decide, fast forward, about 10 years, what to do with my life. And my dad says, you should really consider a career in medicine. And I thought, gosh, there's no way I could become a doctor. With my kind of hypochondriasis, I will never be able to get through that. I'll think I have every illness known to man, and this is going to make my anxiety and problems far worse. But fascinatingly, I did decide to pursue a career in medicine. I took the MCAT and went to school at the University of New Mexico. And it was really through that experience, that I learned something extremely powerful. And this I've applied universally since then, which is, to not make fear-based decisions. It's very easy when we're confronting life to have fear about a hypothetical, an unfounded fear about what may happen. And I think in my case, had I listened to that fear, I would have never become a physician. And as we're all aware of, through training in medicine, you get this incredible perspective on the human experience. You really get a front row seat in what it is to be a human. And you also really learn so much about human illness that in my case, what I realized was my fear was actually really a lack of understanding. And as I developed a deep understanding of medicine throughout my training, that fear completely went away. And I am so grateful that I didn't, have this fear limit me from pursuing a career in medicine. As I went through medical school, I was, someone who, again, was really driven largely to ask these scientific questions. I was a Howard Hughes Medical Institute scholar. I went to the NIH. I was always pursuing research in combination with training in medicine. And I became very passionate about this idea of how we could develop new therapies to treat some of the most perplexing conditions like aging, to more common conditions like heart disease, to those that afflict people with the greatest suffering, I think, such as schizophrenia and other mental illnesses. And so I decided to, in my residency pursuit, pursue a career in kind of primarily indexing on research, and then also in my clinical pursuit. And with that in mind, I chose to go to dermatology, and I went to Stanford, where I trained in dermatology as well as worked in the lab of Howard Chang. And this was an incredibly life-changing experience for me, because as I loved medicine and loved clinical care, really was the first time that I was able to marry that with this, true love of science and an ability to use science to begin to understand disease at a whole new level. So at Stanford, I was researching a disease called systemic sclerosis, and I was leading the first study to look at identical twins with this condition. And what we really had learned was that the genome wasn't the source of why people developed systemic sclerosis. We couldn't identify any real meaningful genetic causes or correlations. So we began to look at the epigenome, and we were looking at identical twins and trying to understand the epigenetic differences in identical twins so that we could parse out, what were the causal factors in the environment and in life that would potentially lead to this disease. It was really through this that I realized, okay, the answers to these diseases and the ability for us to develop new therapies is not going to be completely achieved through the walls of academia and in clinics alone. I really realized there was an opportunity to solve research in a different way, to begin to bring research to where patients lived, rather than have research be something that was simply where the clinicians were. And as I was doing this research in identical twins with rare disease, as you could imagine, if I only limited my research to where the clinicians were, I would have had very few patients and participants. So I had to open the aperture. I had to say, how do we extend research to the broader world of people and move beyond the barriers and walls of a clinic? And it was really through this and working with Howard, who was, just a game-changing innovator. He is such a brilliant scientist and somebody who really thinks out of bounds, that I began to conceptualize a new solution that wasn't about research in the traditional sense, but was really about building a company that could redefine research, building a technology platform that could connect anyone in the world to a research opportunity and enable people like me who wanted to understand disease better and develop therapies for incurable diseases to connect with people and begin that process in an entirely new way. And it was really, in working in Silicon Valley, working at Stanford, and being in this ecosystem of innovation that I learned, another important pearl, which was, as we go through life, I think there's a lot of different things we're thinking about. But if we always optimize for learning, and ideally learning from the best people that we can be around, the best people to help shape our thinking, but ultimately enable us to bring our own creative vision and unique capabilities to that equation, I believe that that's how we can actually achieve our greatest creative and individual output. So as I started to think about, getting something off the ground that wasn't in the lab setting and was really a technology approach, I began to, go outside of the typical clinics and go into, the pitch forums and the entire ecosystem of Silicon Valley. And this is a photo of me back in probably 2014, where I'm pitching at, an all-night hackathon to the judges about this new idea, to connect the world using mobile to help patients with better connectivity and to reduce the barriers to clinical care and clinical research, through new technology means. I was certainly the only dermatology resident, probably the only resident at this particular forum. And I was really way outside of my comfort zone at this point. But I knew that there was something important to be learned. People in Silicon Valley and all over the world were able to effectively raise funding to begin their venture as an entrepreneur, to begin their journey as an entrepreneur. And I wanted to understand how to do this. So, there were 1,000 or more false starts. And, eventually I was able to actually receive funding from a colleague of mine who was one of my mentors in dermatology. And he is Dr. Peter Leo. He's a dermatologist in Chicago. And he actually gave me the very first $25,000 to start this new pursuit. And with that, I was able to hire several engineers, and this is back in about 2015. And since then, Medable and our team have grown tremendously, and that was really the inception point of the story of me kind of becoming an entrepreneur with a little bit of funding. And, what I have found through that is that if you really begin to harness your own kind of individual approach, and I love this design meets medicine, because really what it comes down to is we're all different. We're all unique. Life puts us on a known path with a known role in a specific title. But, when we harness our individuality, I believe that this is where we're able to make our biggest contribution, because this is ultimately, the talent that we were given with, combined with, our entire life experience, and then being able to apply that in new ways, I think is one of the most exciting things. So another pearl is to really derive your own equation, to really, continue to look for the new paths in life where you can harness your ability to apply your knowledge of medicine, your passion for healing patients, and combining that with what it is that kind of sings to your heart in addition to healing. Really tuning in and listening to yourself, and then applying that in new ways so that you can say your path is really the path of, your unique individuality. So when it comes to kind of what I wanted to go after, when I listened to what was really calling me, this obsession with science, this obsession with healing, really trying to eradicate disease, combining that with, always optimizing for learning, and also then to really derive my own equation. What was it that I really wanted to go after? I realized that our company should focus on accelerating the development of new medicines. We had effectively entered as a technology to connect patients to healthcare using mobile. And as we continued down the path, it became very clear that the biggest opportunity was to focus that less on clinical care and more on research, which was, very clear to me being a researcher. So my company, Medable, has a mission, and that mission is to get effective therapies to patients faster. Currently, there are only 50-ish drug approvals per year. There were roughly 53. There were 53 in 2020. And as we all know, there are thousands of uncured and suboptimally treated diseases. So if we look at the current pace of drug development, approvals per year versus even just take, the rare disease subset, which is massive at 9,000, it's going to take us over 150 years at this pace to really create cures for the majority of these conditions. In the entrepreneurial journey, what you realize is that it's not just about, the end game, building an awesome company that satisfies your investors. It's really the primary mission and the path to success is simply staying focused on your mission. Everything else will come together on its own, whether it is recruiting the best people, building a team, having that entire group that can really tackle some of the hardest problems, or if it is, being able to raise venture capital and keep the lights on and, have funding to pay that team and keep them going. All of that comes together when you really, really, really focus on your mission. And I think people, often look at these big company breakthroughs. You see, a Tesla or you name the tech IPO of the day, and people think, oh, that must be about investors and money and dollars and making, all of these massive gains. But the reality is that that's actually not the driver behind the best innovation. I think that the best innovation is really driven by focusing on the goal and the goal alone. And all of those other things that are critical for success really come together. So as I mentioned, our mission is to get effective therapies to patients faster. In building this company and getting it off the ground, from a $25,000 seed investment from a colleague, mentor, dermatologist, to now what is over a 400-person company that, every day I'm leading this group of incredibly talented people on what we think is one of the most important things that we could be working on. I've also learned that it's your differences that are the most valuable traits in building a business. So, an additional pearl I have is, I always kind of had this imposter syndrome. I never went to business school. I hadn't done anything in business prior to starting this company. And what I've learned in building and leading this company is that it's actually all of the things that make me different as a leader, the compassion I have for people, the love I have for the problem, my dedication to patients being, the very most important stakeholder. And then honestly, my own personal experience, being somebody who had experienced different conditions throughout their life, harnessing all of these unique capabilities and a real desire to build something is what has made our company, I think, successful, and certainly something that has made me a successful leader. And when I initially started on this path, I believed that I needed to, have all of the things that a CEO would have from a outside lens, have had the MBA, have all of this executive experience. And I think surely that would not have hurt me in any way, but actually the most important thing I could bring to the table were all of those unique defining characteristics of me and, driving further differentiation in the problem and the solution by virtue of those capabilities and that passion. So where we are today is Dr. Koo mentioned, we serve patients all over the world. We've created this category called decentralized clinical trials. We serve patients in over 60 countries. We have thousands and thousands of patients on our platform who are participating in registrational clinical trials. We have over 150 active. As I mentioned, there's over 400 people on our team. We're growing at about 300% a year. And we have raised over, actually now there's a big announcement next week, but we've raised over $500 million to fundamentally accelerate the ability to develop a new therapy. And we, in this most recent funding round, have a $2 billion valuation. I don't personally, like, I see this and, frankly, it's all on paper at this point. What motivates me is I think we have a really important role to play. When I look at how medicines are developed, there aren't companies like ours who care as much as we care, who are in it to truly change the way the medicines are developed, who bring every day this incredible passion to this problem. And, kind of coming back to the very beginning, when I think about, how I can leverage creativity, with my training as a physician, it's really a life's work. It's about, what it is that makes you an individual, and combining that with your skills as a physician or healthcare worker, and, looking at what it is that makes you you, and leveraging that for the biggest benefit to people in humanity. So as a summary on, my pearls, I think, really it is the primary limitation to what you do is your imagination for what's possible. I never would have guessed that I could start a company with $25,000 that would go on, in 6 years to be over 400 people, almost 500 today, and be executing clinical trials over 150. Sometimes I look back and think, what if we had even dreamed bigger from the very beginning? And so, one of the takeaways is really just the primary limitation to what you can do, harnessing your experiences in medicine, with your unique capabilities and talents, is really just the limitation of your imagination for what is possible. And I totally believe that we're at the tip of the iceberg. And every day I challenge our team to dream bigger, think bigger, set a bigger goal. I think that's actually how the biggest things are accomplished. And yeah, just cheers to everyone who, has had the chance to be at Jefferson, train in medicine, who is looking for new ways to apply your incredible talents to the very, very, very many challenges we face in the delivery of healthcare and serving patients.
All right. I have so many notes, Michelle, and I thought that we have a good amount of time. We have about 20 minutes to let's do a little fireside chat. We have, so if you're those listening, please put your questions in the Q&A. I have 1,000 questions here. So can I start off with mine, Mark? Or do you have one first? Oh, you have to put yourself.
I just have a comment, which is
go.
You're way too young to have so many pearls of wisdom that resonate. So
you have an endowed lecture, and as you mentioned,
yours isn't far behind. But I would just say that amidst those pearls, all of which are just fantastic, actually, and well phrased, is at some point you were able to distill and then crystallize the message and mission. And I must say, it for me, in a very different world, because I'm a bench scientist, it took me much longer to even get close to figuring out that my message was way too complex. My decks were too long, and how do you get it down to sort of the core principle? And I guess turning that into a question, at the point when you got that 25,000, was it as crystal clear as you're presenting it now, or at what point? Right. How did you get to that point? Because I think many of the students who are listening, would benefit from understanding that process.
Absolutely. So at that point, it was not that clear. That's for sure. One of the things I think is phenomenal about business as an application of, science and innovation is, through your experience in biotech, you're interfacing with an entirely a group of people, who in many cases are less close to the science and less close to the problem that you're solving. And it really forces you to think about it from an outside perspective. And to your point, make sure your message is clear to anyone in the world. What I've learned, through entrepreneurship is people want to be inspired. People want to get behind ideas that they think are going to really improve human life. And if you can articulate how that's going to happen in a clear and concise way, you'll end up having a lot of support and a lot of wind in your sails. So no, that was not version 1. That was probably our version, maybe after, I don't know, like our series B of raising maybe, I don't know, $9 million or something. And then getting into the bigger kind of leagues of the investors and needing to make that message more clear and something that would resonate with someone who had zero background in medicine.
Yeah, sounds great.
Michelle, you talked about 1,000 false starts. So I was curious to know, what were some of the challenges that you faced to start this company, and how competitive was it?
Yeah. And, it was insanely competitive. I mean, we ran out of money countless times, basically just on fumes. And we had, we didn't completely run out of money, but you know how that goes. You have an idea, you start a company, you were making meaningful progress. You're growing the team, you have all of these balancing, balance factors. And for everyone, yes, I'm not kidding. It feels like 5,000 no's. And I think one of the most important skills in entrepreneurship is an irrational resilience, because you really just have to tune it out, know what you're working on is important, and just literally stay in the game. So, we had a couple of really breakthrough moments that kept the company, really moving forward. And I can remember in, April of 2020, right when the pandemic was hitting, we were about to close a big investment round, and everyone was worried about what was going to happen in the world. People were no longer making investments. We were able to close the round, and really at that point, just trying to keep the company alive. And then our company served an incredibly important role in COVID to keep the clinical trials going. It was the first time we saw meaningful, real adoption. And fast forward a year, you could have never guessed, but fast forward a year to date, we had $150 million in the bank. And so, we would never have seen that coming. I think the reason I say that is you just have to stay in the game. If you believe in what you're doing, you find a path forward, and the best people on your team will stay and be with you through those harder times.
As far as Medable's platform, can you describe how that works and how that's different from the current process of how, if you're a patient enrolling in a trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So, clinical research in general is limited to only the clinical sites that are executing the research. And in oncology, in many therapeutic areas, but certainly in oncology, that means in some cases, the therapy that would be the most important for the patient is often in research in a phase 2 or 3 trial in certain types of cancer. And that would actually mean if you're not proximal to that clinic, you wouldn't be able to participate in that clinical trial, and therefore may not, receive the therapy. Decentralized clinical trials in our platform enables anyone to participate remotely. It takes the measures and all the things that are needed to be in a clinical trial and really makes them centered around the patient, using local doctors, local labs, local imaging, including as well as remote technologies that can capture that data. And so it really improves the 3% of people who may participate in clinical research and opens that door to pretty much anyone who would be interested.
I have a question from Dr. Adam Dicker. He asks, there are other companies in this space, so how did you differentiate yourself?
Yeah, so at the time when we started our company, interestingly, there was another over time, and I don't think we were aware of them at the very beginning, company founded by a dermatologist also out of Los Angeles. And they had really focused on providing dermatologists through telemedicine to be able to be remote investigators, remote doctors. Whereas we had really focused, being in Silicon Valley, on the technology piece. So our primary differentiator all along has been less about providing the doctors and then enabling doctors who would be at these typical sites to use a connected technology platform to conduct the research. So to date, we've remained very differentiated along that thesis. And one of the things that's important is again, comes back to what makes you different. Build on that, build on that, build on that. That's where your value really is.
If I could just add a comment there, you've talked a lot about being fearless, and I think just listening to you now, this notion of fearlessness is also, even if there's other people in a given space,
totally,
if you have an angle, right, you may go after it. I know in terms of myself, when we got a new CEO, he decided to go after validated targets. It wasn't, you don't have to have a novel target. If your platform is unique and gives you an advantage, go straight at it. I think, it takes a bit of fearlessness just to go in a clinical trial space that is so dense and trafficked, but yet you had a vision and you were able to take that vision and differentiate yourself in that way.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think, at the point where you're an expert in, to the degree that, many of us who are trained are, you're going to have a unique angle, a unique experience. And again, just building on your unique passion will also lead to differentiation.
There's a question from John Vale. It says, inspiring talk. And can you speak a little bit about the process for assembling the initial team? Who did you connect with first, and how did that process evolve? And I imagine it's still evolving as you're growing.
Absolutely. So, they say like choosing a co-founder is kind of like, choosing choosing a founding team is kind of like choosing a partner in life. And it's true. I think in looking at our initial founding team, we have just an incredible group of people, many of whom I had worked with, and had in my life for several years, some that were brand new, that I just happened to meet, in Silicon Valley. You've got companies making it and companies that aren't making it. And I remember I was at a restaurant and looking for a patent lawyer, and they were saying, oh, I've got a great patent lawyer and my company is not going to make it. And I've got some amazing engineers. Could I connect them with you? This is right when I got that initial $25,000, and I interviewed a couple of the people that person recommended, and one of them became a co-founder, and has been in the company ever since. So you really want to look for people who are passionate about the problem, who are going to be able to stay in through the thick and thin. If people really start negotiating on comp, it's not the right time from a founding perspective. You got to go for the passion and the blood, sweat, and tears. There's really what needs to be invested at that stage. But it certainly, you can also make the wrong choice and you can recover.
Dr. Morgan Hutchinson asks a question about what advice would you give to our medical students who are interested in entrepreneurship or product development while trying to balance these pursuits while focusing on medical education, and probably the same for residents as well. Because did you have this idea during residency or right after residency?
Yeah, I had the idea even in as as kind of medical school, but then in residency, it became much more clear. I think that first and foremost, we want to become an expert. We want to focus on the highest quality of training and clinical care we can deliver. At the right point, there are opportunities to take time that's dedicated to the entrepreneurial journey or learning product development. And I think that looking for a program like that can really help, or even, taking time out from the traditional training path to do that. In some cases, I think people have been able to pursue a lightweight early version in like the later stages, if it's conducive to what they're actively working on in, say, their research or their clinical care. And I think there's no one right answer, but I do think that people who have that passion should really explore it, because I find that it's the route to the deepest satisfaction for those people. And I don't think that, certain, like if you just kind of squelch that and just stick with the clinical care and not listen, to what's really calling you, I think later, you kind of wish you tuned into that a bit earlier.
Hmm.
But that's my own opinion,
Yeah.
and I'm totally unfounded. So
I had a question around, so many of these startups, medtech startups fail, and it's pretty scary to venture into this crowded space. It requires a ton of capital. Can you speak a little bit about some of the key ingredients that you had for your success? And you had alluded to some of them in your talk, but
yeah,
I just, because you started this in 2015, it's not that long ago. It was 6 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there were earlier versions of the concept, but I think that it's no one gets it right out of the gate, and the learning is so important that no matter what ends up with the path, there will be something you can take away that will help you be more likely to be successful at some point. So, now it looks like we raised all this money and things, were great. But as I mentioned earlier, there were so many years where we were early to the concept, early to, we knew this mattered, but there wasn't really a market. And during that time, I think that it was very useful to continue to make progress on very limited funding. And it makes your business stronger ultimately. I also do have, many colleagues who have, done startups, and at some point they work, or their second one works. I just think the learning itself is so valuable that, again, it's not about the end game. And that was kind of my pearl. It's really just about the mission. And whether it's your first startup or your fifth startup, or, it's whatever it is, if you have a mission that you want to, pursue in life, success will follow if you really stick to that and you develop mastery around that.
And what does scaling look like for Medable? What does the next 5-10 years look like?
Yeah, I mean, we are really looking, as I mentioned, there's 53 drug approvals in 2020. When you look at the number of suboptimally treated and uncured diseases, we think we've got to make that pace faster. So, mRNA technology, siRNA technology, immunotherapy, the science at the research end is phenomenal. Right now, the clinical development, the clinical trials are one of the biggest bottlenecks to us having more cures for disease. So our measure of success is truly making it so that we have more drugs in development, and ideally then more effective therapies that get through that process. So scaling for us in success is all about driving more, greater throughput by virtue of improving the speed and reducing the cost. Now, scaling a company to do that is extremely hard. And, I have many wrinkles and gray hair as a result. I just, have some root spray, but it's a crazy hard process. And at the same time, when you see the progress with the new drug approvals that you've been a part of, we were part of some of the COVID vaccines and some of the COVID therapies. There's nothing like it to make you're working on something that matters, and you're going to scale it up to have an even bigger impact than where you are today.
Can you talk a bit more about that? What did it look like if you were a patient enrolling in COVID trials, and how did the Medable platform fit into that process?
Yeah, so prior to COVID, everyone who was in a clinical trial largely was going into a clinic, and they would be considered to be potentially a fit, and they would be screened. One of the things we did really in April-May timeline was we changed that entire screening process for one of the largest site networks in the world to be completely virtual. So we took all of the staff, all of the screening services, and connected them through a virtual service where anyone in the world could indicate interest and be immediately dropped into a qualified screening visit, or schedule a visit and go through that screening. And we found through that, by essentially doing over 2,000 of those screening visits a month, that alone decreased the overall enrollment phase, which is about 60% of most clinical trials, by a factor of 3. So that was one of the earliest transformations that we made. And as a result, we helped enroll, many patients into both the vaccine therapies and then trials that would have otherwise been stopped. And then for the actual execution portion of the trial, our technology enabled remote participation and remote execution for the clinical staff, many of whom in the early part of the quarantine were at home. So, it really was the first time that the idea of remote had the opportunity to be tested. And we were able to, really show that it could lead to important efficiencies.
So if I could just, speculate wildly here, my understanding of what Medable does is it sort of democratizes access to established and existing trials.
And new, but yeah.
But there's an extension that this could be taken either by you or someone else, because you also have the companies, let's say like MD Clone, which are democratizing hypothesis generation for clinical trials, right? You look for a car, I wake up in the morning and think, well, maybe people who scratch their nose twice, in the waiting room, that may be a sign that they have some underlying dermatologic thing that's coming up. And now you get the trial. So you could almost, virtualize and democratize both the creation of trials alongside then tapping into the, a vast, using planet Earth's people, remotely for the access piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we have over 200 independent investigators just trained on that very thing. Like, what are the questions? But I love your idea of democratizing it, to your point, because, we know from patients and people that some of the, strongest insights and correlations are coming from these real, observations. So I think it's a really interesting idea.
You're democratizing clinical observation. You can mine databases of millions of people then to test that, and through an MD Clone, and then move on to doing the trial.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do 2 more questions. Adam Dicker asks, does a platform work for drugs that may have more toxicity, or what type of drugs won't be suitable for the Medable platform?
Yeah, so, there's always, not always, but in general, what we conduct are something called hybrid decentralized clinical trials. So that's going to be a combination of remote and in person. Sometimes those in person are not, at one of the limited kind of expert sites, but those in-person visits can be at something that's more local to the patient. The biggest therapeutic area actually for our company is in oncology. So there are ways to ensure patient safety. You have to look at it from the very beginning in terms of how the technology is designed to fit the protocol, but it's actually not really a limitation in the application. It just certainly dictates, how and what you do throughout the clinical trial course.
And I love this last question here. It's from Carly Onofrio. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self, especially during the obstacles you face on this path?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think that there were probably so many times I was, you have to have a certain level of passion and dedication to just care so much about this pursuit, and I think there were certainly times where everything seemed like, oh, it was never going to move forward, and we found a path forward. So, I think I probably could have had, I would have perhaps stressed less, worried a little less, but at the same time, I'm not sure that then I would have found that path forward. And so, I need to think about that one more. But I definitely think that, if I look back, there's so many things that I am so grateful for. And I do wish that, I had the opportunity to even potentially learn more. I do wish I'd learned a little bit more about entrepreneurship, perhaps before starting the journey. But I don't know. It's so hard to say. Every day I'm just, so excited by the opportunity for what we get to work on. Not that I don't have any regrets, but I think in all, we somehow found a path forward, and today have an incredible opportunity to make a big impact.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'll hand it off to you, Mark, since this is your lecture, to close us out.
Well, great. Thanks. That was just incredibly inspiring. I also, I would say, I also love the way you started the presentation in referring to grandfather, father, and mother as mentors. For me, that resonates, and has always been an inspiration as the son of immigrants who were self-made and came here with a shirt on their back. So I think it's just beautiful from beginning to end, and it's an inspiration for all of us. So thanks, doing honor to my Endowed lecture series.
Oh, well, it was such an honor to get to
And to Al Spivak,
Yeah,
from Stanford.
exactly. Exactly.
Great, thanks a lot.
All right.
And you have we would love to go less virtual, so you have an open invitation to come to Philadelphia
Cool.
post-pandemic. It is ranked, I believe, in the top 3 cities in America as a restaurant city now. So you get a free top meal on Jefferson.
Oh, I would absolutely love to come to Philadelphia and to come to Jeff. So I'll be there as soon as possible.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. Have a good afternoon, evening, or the rest of your morning. Bye.